Hello and welcome to Food to Go, the podcast brought to you by the New Food team. My name is Joshua Minchin, I'm the editor of New Food, and sat next to me, rather than opposite me this week, is Grace Galler, New Food assistant editor. Grace, how are you this morning?
I'm really good, Josh, but we're in a slightly different location for this podcast.
Well, yeah, you're sat next to me, not opposite, and there's a reason for that, and I reckon you should let our listeners in on why that is.
Well, we're really excited to be in London today at the BMPA head office to interview Nick Allen about some various concerns from the meat sector about what has been going on recently regarding a myriad of topics, actually, Josh. It's not just one concern, is it?
Well, Nick, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Can you very briefly tell us where we are and what you do here?
Okay, well, you're at the British Meat Processors Association offices here in Clerkenwell Green. We represent probably the larger meat processors in the country. Our members would probably handle 90% of the pork that gets consumed in the country, probably 80 to 85% of the beef, and probably sort of 60 to 70% of the lamb in the country. We don't get involved in poultry. And what do? We help our members understand the legislation. We work so very closely with them, as there's constantly sort of in touch about wanting to understand the detail of legislation, and particularly at the moment, more recently, they're wanting to understand everything that's changing, particularly around Brexit. So Brexit's caused an enormous amount of work for us in terms of actually them alerting them to sort of the changes that are happening, what they've got to do, how they've got to handle things, and helping them with export health certificates and understanding that sort of system, we're constantly helping them on sort of technical level, and also we spend an awful lot of time trying to communicate with government and civil servants and bridge that gap between that knowledge gap that the civil servants haven't got, and obviously they can't sort of get from the industry sort of directly about how the supply chain works, really. So we spend an awful lot of time talking to civil servants and in meetings with them, understanding, explaining to them how the system works, and how they could do things differently to be more helpful to us, really, and hopefully lower the cost and sort of to the benefit of everyone.
It's a lovely little corner of London. It's kind of very quiet. I feel like I'm on a village green straight from Farringdon, which is bustling.
It is. It's very nice, and we got some very good eateries around here, actually, which goes down very well.
Spotted those on the walk here, actually.
Yes, yeah.
And we should probably mention as well, this is kind of the spiritual home of meat in London. We've got Smithfield Market 3 minutes away.
It is indeed, yes, just round the sort of corner, although it's moving soon.
Yeah, of course, it is. Is that definitely going ahead? Because I know that was rumoured for a long time.
As far as I know, actually, so yes, I'm not sure the actual timescale of plans, but yeah, it is on the move. So.
And what's the feeling? I mean, we're jumping straight in it, Nick, but what's the feeling there? That seems like a real shame.
Well, we actually don't, ironically, have that much to do with Smithfield Market. Actually, it's become really an outlet for the restaurants in sort of London. So whilst some of our members supply through there, it just comes in sort of at night and sort of goes out the next morning. So to be honest, we don't have an awful lot to do with it. So it's and haven't for some time, really.
I've massively jumped the gun there.
Yeah.
Nick, as Grace said, we've got so much to cover today because it's been a busy few months, probably a few years for you, heading up the BMPA. I'll start nice and broad. What's concerning the BMPA most at the moment? What's keeping you up at night, day in, day out at the moment?
Long term, what really keeps myself and my members awake at night is actually the fact that because of the food policies we've got in this country, livestock numbers are declining, and therefore our source product, and if anything, actually our source product is declining faster than consumption is. We all know sort of meat consumption is dropping sort of slightly, but it's given the actually increase in population, we still have quite a lot of meat to supply in this country, and the government policies seem to be sort of leading to sort of declining livestock numbers, and that's probably the thing that concerns our members most. After that, there's a whole plethora of challenges that have come sort of since Brexit, and I have to steel myself not to sound as though I'm too much of an anti-Brexit person. It's done. That's the way the government went, but you just wish it was being implemented better. So many policies have come in, and it's not actually about Brexit. It's actually the things we've done in our government, the way they've implemented them since Brexit, that's actually caused most of the problems. Yes.
So Nick, would you say that for your members, Brexit isn't something that is working for them?
No, I would say actually all our membership have seen since Brexit is increased cost. And sooner or later, that cost has to be picked up by someone. Either the farmer gets sort of paid sort of less for it because of or that cost has to come out, or the consumer has to pay more for it, or it eats into their margins. And probably the evidence at the moment is that actually the processors are taking a hit at the moment of the increased costs. Because of that shortage of supply of livestock, they're having to pay some of the highest prices they've ever paid for livestock, in the fact that probably the highest livestock farm gate price in the world. And we have a consumer and a retail sort of sector that's extremely powerful, and constantly everyone's battling inflation. So at the moment, the processor's actually picking up the tab for a lot of the increased cost.
I had said this question for later on, but I think it's the right time to bring it up. When we speak about price, you're saying the process of picking up the bill at the moment. Do you think consumers are going to have to get used to paying more for their meat in the future? Is it sustainable long term?
It's a very unpopular thing to sort of say, but sadly, over the years, actually, the consumers got used to cheap food and they've paid too little for the cost of it. And it's been supported over the years by government policy, by the Common Agricultural Policy that actually helped farmers sort of stay in business. Those payments have certainly now been taken away, and sort of something we've seen since Brexit. The government sort of come up with, well, we will pay farmers for things, but we want sort of something for it. And the reality is the payments they were getting were a safety net for them. That safety net's been taken away, so hence, they're realising, well, actually we can't make a living out of this. So it's so I come back to what I was saying earlier. Our biggest concerns actually about this declining livestock number. So yeah, it's an unpopular thing to say, especially when there's people out there that are struggling to afford food, to say actually everyone should be paying more. But I feel the reality is if people in this country can't afford food, that's a societal problem. It's not something the supply chain should actually have to pay the bill for. The government should actually address those issues. We should strive to have an economy where everyone can afford food, not actually, the food supply chain have to produce it sort of cheaply to support what's going on in society.
I want to turn back to Brexit, because it's been dominating headlines for, it feels like forever, but definitely for 4 years,
Yes,
5 years,
yes.
probably more longer. It's come to a head in the last few months, it feels like, with the bringing in of new legislation, new regulation, things are actually taking effect and people are noticing. But is this something that's happened over the last 6 months in terms of the problems your members are having, or is this a longer issue?
No, really, from day one we started running into problems. Well, not necessarily from day one, but the minute they actually started imposing sort of the rules in terms of export health certificates to Europe, once everything was signed and signed, and we had to start to go through all the regulations to actually export to Europe. That immediately increased the sort of the cost of exporting to Europe, and actually limited what we could sell as well, actually, because the challenges of getting through the bureaucracy meant you had to simplify your loads. You had to you couldn't actually do everything how you were doing it. We were supplying a 24/7 supply chain, and we were given an export system that was basically geared around exporting frozen containers of meat around the world. It didn't matter, and it doesn't matter if a container gets held up for a few days. If it's frozen, or even a few weeks. Whereas actually when you're supplying a 24/7 supply chain, i.e. retailers on the continent, they want to phone up one night and have it there the next morning. And the system that we've been given really doesn't lend itself to that.
Why is that? Because it seems to me incomprehensible that a government would not plan a system for the majority of its users, which is, as you say, just-in-time supply chains.
Yeah, I don't think they knew and understood what was going to actually happen when they signed up. And of course, the rhetoric around the Brexit vote, sort of before it happened, was actually, no, it's all right, we'll sign a trade deal with Europe and everything will carry on as normal. Well, a lot of us could see that was never going to happen, and indeed it sort of hasn't happened. So you now, if you want to export, you have to have an export health certificate for starters. That has to be signed by a vet. Every little bit of that product, if it's slightly different, that has to have a different export health certificate. Those are running out about close to £200 an export health certificate. So hence people are trying to simplify their loads rather than actually sort of supplying lots of more difficult sort of bits, different cuts of meat on a load, to actually keep the cost down. And then there's the challenge of getting through the port. So one of our members told the other day it's probably put £1,500 a load on every lorry that goes through. So and he was there was that mounts up into millions just for one company, every year, just to actually sort of get that stuff exported, and that's not really taking into account the army of office staff you need to collect all the paperwork and sort of track all this, so that actually you can get the paperwork right as it goes through. So it's just added a huge cost and delays and challenges to the to maintaining it and keeping our customers happy on the continent.
Do you think that these new checks will make for a safer food system in the future, or are they really doing more harm than good and putting labour in less important places within the meat sector?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've only been sort of talking about the checks exporting. Sort of, they're only just now implementing checks for importing. So they started at the beginning of this year, but they haven't really started, and they're not really going to sort of be enforcing them so correctly, as they say, until the end of April. And we'll see then actually as to how how difficult it is to get stuff in. So, but in terms of food safety, it makes no difference at all. No one's altered anything. We're producing to the same standards we were before we left Europe. We pretty much maintain the same sort of food regulations as has Europe. So we're just exchanging sort of products under the same sort of food safety regimes. So there's no gain or danger so far to sort of to food safety. We have got some concerns about actually illegal imports coming in, but actually that's not necessary. There's potentially that they could have been sort of happening anyway. So pre-Brexit, that's actually about putting the resources at the ports to actually sort of pick up on those things. It's not necessarily a straightforward sort of Brexit issue. The fact that we're aware that illegal imports are starting to come in, and we've got concerns about those both from animal welfare point of view, sort of an animal disease point of view, and also possibly a human health issue. Really, we believe there's a black market sort of developing for illegally imported meat into the country, and that's, unfortunately we can't prove it and we don't know where it's happening, but we are seeing meat come in illegally that shouldn't be exported, should never have left its country of origin, and we have the evidence for that, but where it's being sold we don't know.
Why do you think that is, and is there a spike, I suppose, Nick, since Brexit in food fraud, which I think is what you're talking about? Why do you think there is that market at the moment more than there has been in the past?
I wouldn't necessarily describe it as sort of a spike in food fraud, but so when there's when you put extra costs in, you put a margin in there. It's all about money, really, and that's okay. So if you add extra cost to actually getting something into the country, then actually if you can bring it in illegally, there's just straight away a margin to be had there, isn't there? But it's but some of the meat we're seeing come in from the pictures we've seen is coming from areas that has been stamped. It shouldn't be exported outside that country because it has a hexagon sort of stamp on it, and that. So that will be bought cheap in that country, and therefore they seem to be able to sort of think that actually they can load it in a van and sort of bring it over here and bring it through our ports and sell it on our streets and sell it to people whoever over here. It won't be going through legitimate traders because of the stamps on it, but it's yes, you follow the money, don't you? Basically, some money to be made there. So someone unfortunately takes advantage of it.
Nick, I wanted to pick up on another concern in the meat sector. There's currently a shortage of official veterinarians. What problems is this causing? Yeah,
it's not just the vets, actually. Probably our biggest concern is actually shortage of labour. We've really struggled to sort of find skilled butchers since Brexit. We had free movement of labour. When Brexit happened, we had something like sort of 65 to 70% of staff was non-UK staff, and most of it was from Europe, and an awful lot from Eastern Europe, sort of Poland, Romania, sort of Bulgaria. They sort of, a lot of them sort of left after Brexit. They almost felt they sort of weren't wanted, and we had to start replacing them. And then the government introduced the English language test, which started to eliminate some of the Eastern European sort of countries, and we've had to go sort of further afield to sort of find butchers, and at huge cost. But we just haven't been able to find them in this country. Our meat plants have become more consolidated. They're probably away from the main sort of centres because they're more geared to getting animals to them rather than actually people to them. So, and mobility of labour is not easy in this country. So finding people to actually to work in the plants that are skilled enough to do these jobs has been really, really difficult, especially the skilled butchers that are capable of boning out an animal doing it. So we've had to be bringing them in from the Philippines, and we've had this ongoing argument with government. They sort of say, well, just pay them more. Well, we have been paying them more. The wages have gone up dramatically, and still we're not attracting people. So they're still people have been using these visas, and it's probably cost best part of £15,000 a person to actually, by the time you've gone through the visa system and paid them and brought them in. So employers wouldn't be doing that if they could actually just pay someone more and get them. They're doing it because they just can't find the people. And now, just recently, we've had this recent ruling from government where they put a ceiling of 26,200 on the sort of the visas that you had to you were obliged to pay the people coming in. Now they're talking about raising it up to 38,700. That's a 50% increase
as the minimum to get the visa.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. And what they don't seem to have factored in, and we keep writing to the government and sort of flagging this. Look, there's an equal pay act in this country. You can't just bring people in at 38,700, just a handful of people, and it's not huge numbers we're bringing in. We're probably the industry's probably bringing about 2,000 a year. So in the scale of immigration, this isn't huge numbers, but you can't bring a few people in and pay them 38,700 and having someone working alongside them. It's illegal. You get pulled up, and anyway, why would those workers accept that? So effectively, if this happens, they've potentially put a massive increase onto labour costs, not just in our sector, but right across the whole food industry, because people, you either got a choice of bringing them in and increase your whole pay by close to £10,000 per head right across the organisation, or you don't bring them in. You're struggling for labour. You probably then sort of try and increase how much you're sort of paying. Either way, it's hugely inflationary. And our concerns is we just won't get the people, so people will start to thinking, well, we're not going to invest in this country. And certainly our meat companies, a lot of them are international meat companies, so they've got a choice. They don't have to invest in this country. They can invest in Ireland, they can invest in Denmark, and invest abroad as well if the conditions are right. So there comes a point where they say, well, we won't. We won't put the effort into sort of investing in the UK. We'll do it somewhere else, and we'll just send it here. So our food security sort of drops, our GDP sort of drops because we're importing more food that we should be able to produce and supply here.
The other side of that argument is that we should be training and producing more British butchers. That's what somebody else might say.
Yeah.
Why aren't we doing that? Why is that not a solution?
I would say we are, but we're just not. We're not able to keep up, and you still can't sort of keep it. And it starts right from schools. We were saying this morning in this sort of conversation. Actually, one of the problems is education in schools has been dropped about food. So there's not much. So that right from the start, school children don't even encouraged to think about going into the food industry. It's not just the meat industry. That's when has to go into the food industry, and then they never leave school thinking, actually, are we going to work in that industry? It's not sort of top of their list really. So it's that doesn't help. But I would say, and I sort of point to the work our members have been doing in terms of putting in sort of training programs, but it's still really hard to get people to actually come and sort of do these jobs, because there's so many other jobs out there that are better paid. Our dread is, of all our members, is an Amazon warehouse sort of appears down the road from them, and that's it. Sort of trying to actually hold on to your staff in an area like that, so they're able to pay considerably more. And let's be honest, it's probably less physically sort of tiring work. That the hours are probably more sort of friendly. A meat plant has to open in the early hours of the morning, sort of 6 o'clock in the morning. It's starting to think about getting going because you're trying to get everything through early. You're working in cold conditions. Okay, you can't do anything about that. It's a chilled environment for food safety reasons. So you have to work in heavy clothing. So it's a job to make it, even though it's a skilled job, and the people that do get involved in it and actually quite love it and actually sort of keen on it, and a skilled butcher is as they develop their skills, they're really proud of the lifetime skills they've developed. But you have to be quite robust to do it. It's not everyone's cup of tea. You have to accept that.
Grace, one thing I am always in awe of is the innovation happening in our food and beverage industry.
Josh, I'm exactly the same. I'm constantly reporting on the most exciting stories, whether it's a crucial piece of food safety research or the latest developments in the world of cultured meat.
Yes, I mean, to me, cultured meat is one of the most fascinating corners of our sector, and all eyes are on it in terms of it becoming the next big thing in food. Could it be the solution to some of the greatest challenges we face?
Well, funny you should say that, Josh, because our podcast partner Merck is also watching on with a very keen eye and has a dedicated team ready to help assist the food and beverage industry with tailored support when it comes to customised cell culture media, QC and HACCP solutions, and regulatory guidance.
Yes, absolutely, Grace. And let's not forget the plant-based protein, precision fermentation, or regenerative agriculture side either. It's so important nowadays to have a multifaceted approach as an F&B manufacturer, and Merck really gets this. Like they say, we just have to change as a sector if we are to become more sustainable.
You can explore possibilities and learn more about Merck's contribution to this exciting field at www.sigmaaldrich.com/cultured meat.
Nick, just on that point about the Amazon warehouse opening 10 miles down the road, there was a time when being a butcher, and I suppose it's still true today, was a real skilled profession, a real valued profession in communities. Do you think we've lost that? Do you think we're disconnected from our food in terms of the people that make it and produce it?
Well, certainly we've got fewer and fewer butcher shops. The ones that are out there now, I think, are surviving, and that sort of drop-off seems to have survived. But, of course, the retail sector has been sort of quite good about sort of competing against those butchers and actually offering an offer to the consumer in the big retail stores that looks just as good as going to a butcher. So unfortunately, the consumer tends to go in there buying other things, and they buy their meat while they're there. So we've seen a decline in the number of butchers in the country, and that sort of, therefore we've lost that source of trained butchers. And I think the reason why some of these other countries have been a good sort of source of people is because they've had that local training. So certainly we've missed out on that sort of source, so not having those people that just sort of start and go and work for the local butcher and so then sort of possibly move on to sort of meat plant or something like that. Yes, we've lost, so that's made it a lot more difficult, undoubtedly.
The UK government's recently announced a campaign to back British farmers and best of British produce by putting that on the labelling of meat and agricultural products in supermarkets. How will this help the sector, if at all?
Well, as I said, that's always, with the red tractor, it's always been there anyway. Red tractors came into sort of play probably sort of post foot and mouth really in 2001, and it's gradually developed. So, and there's good sort of labelling. So I would say the consumer, it's fairly easy to identify whether it's British or not. And in fairness to the major retailers, they have, in terms of the meat sector, they've stayed fairly loyal to sort of supplying, on the whole, supplies of British meat where they can. So I don't think there's... I think there's plenty of incentives out there. I think if people want to sort of buy British and that's top of their list, they can do that. And there's a danger when governments start implementing things that they just add yet another cost in. So, we've had all sorts of arguments about animal welfare. There is nothing wrong whatsoever with labelling animals outdoor produced pigs or whatever, nothing wrong with that. The trouble is they always want to actually put this judgment on it as to whether it's good or bad or not. And that's a very subjective judgment, and that tends to get influenced by people that have got a particular view on it, whether something is or not. So as I say, there's nothing wrong, I think, with labelling method of production, but it's the judgment that gets applied to it that is the problem, and it's the same with eco-labelling. Potentially it whilst it sounds great, it has a massive potential to add a huge cost, and at a sorting out or what is that correct eco-labelling, what is right. It's still, again, there's a lot of views on actually what is environmentally friendly, what is good for the environment. One of the arguments, and I've been relaying this to the Welsh Minister sort of just recently in terms of their proposals. This country, the UK, is it's one of the best countries in the world to produce grass in, and therefore to produce livestock in, and we've got farmers that really care about animal welfare. If you just look at it parochially, and think actually we've got to worry about our carbon footprint in this country, and you start to cut down on these things, you probably just mean that actually it's produced somewhere else in the world, that in a less animal welfare friendly way, in a less environmentally friendly way. So we should actually, to my mind, if you're going to look at climate change on a global basis, you should be thinking, what do we do well here? We can actually produce livestock with a low carbon footprint in a really good animal welfare way. We should be expanding what we're doing and exporting it all over the world, really, and not letting it, cutting back and letting it be produced in other countries where it's going to be not so good. So we've got to stop looking at this in a sort of a parochial fashion in the way it has been. I think governments of the world have actually got to start judging their carbon footprint on what their country consumes, not on what it produces, because otherwise we're not really going to solve this. Climate change is a global issue. It's not something that's just settled here locally, and just sort of sorting out what's right in our own back garden doesn't solve the problem.
There are those, though, that would suggest that consuming less meat overall is an answer to potential climate change. Is that a view that the BMPA shares?
Look, we've always argued that actually some meat is just a part of a healthy, balanced diet. Over consuming anything is wrong, but our consumption in this country isn't massive, compared to other sort of countries. Our sort of consumption sort of per head isn't, in fact, actually there are scientists in this country who say they're concerned about the overall level. But within that average, you've got some people that probably aren't eating enough, maybe because they can't afford it or they've been misled on things like that, and they probably ought to eat a little bit more for health reasons. And there's some that are eating too much, and it's arriving that right balance. But if you look at the average in this country, we're not massively over the top, and probably in line with most health guidelines, really. So but we've only ever advocated, eat it as part of a healthy, balanced diet, and we've joined in with people like the HDB to support the campaigns around the balanced plate. We don't campaign to sort of fill your plate with meat, nothing else. That's not what we do. So I hope over the years we've taken a responsible attitude towards this, really.
Nick, I want to take you back to Brexit one last time. I'm sure you're very bored of it by now. If there were one or two very quick wins that you think the UK government could put in place to really relieve the pressure on your members, what would they be? It
would be to align with Europe. It's our biggest market that we export to, and it's our biggest market that we import from. We've got exactly the same sort of regulations. We've changed nothing really since we sort of left Europe. Why? If we're operating in the same, I'm not saying as set we're not going to sort of rejoin Europe, but you could agree to a sort of a line with on SPS. Have an SPS agreement, a financial agreement with Europe, and therefore you could do away with all the bureaucracy. We're operating to the same standards. So why do you need all this paperwork, all this in both directions? That adds a massive cost. We would. A colleague of mine, and just we went out to the new border control post at Sevington the other day on some Monday. Millions, hundreds of millions of pounds probably been spent building this one border control post to look at 1% of the lorries that are sort of coming into this country. 150 people are needing to be put there just to look at 1% of the lorries that are sort of being sort of pulled up, just to sort of produce sort of checks. What's that really adding to the party, really? It's just adding a massive cost, really. So yes, if we had one wish, it would actually be, look, let's have a sensible conversation with Europe. If in the future we choose as an independent country we want to sort of realign something, or we want to do something differently, then you have that conversation with Europe and actually sort of say, well, look, we want to do these things differently. Do you agree or not? But while we're doing the same things as them, for goodness sake, let's have alignment and let's cut out all the paperwork. So that'd be top of my wish list.
Is that optics, do you think, Nick? That kind of massive investment in programs that aren't going to have that much impact? Is it political optics?
Definitely. Well, is it political optics? They have to do it because of what's been negotiated. So if that they now have to do it, we now have to have all this sort of paperwork. During the Brexit campaign, of course, they said these things wouldn't happen. That they have, and they've been implemented. So, it's a combination of political optics. We have to sort of show that we are outside of Europe, but it's you just learn for a bit of common sense to be applied here. If they're producing food to those regulations and we're producing food to the same regulations and we haven't altered them, why do we need a sort of hundreds of millions of pounds spent in both countries? Because the French and the Europeans have had to do it as well, and we've had to do it, and we've got a plethora of people dealing with all the paperwork. It's all added a cost somewhere that sooner or later probably the consumer ends up picking up.
I want to stick with trade deals just for a second, because there's been some landmark ones signed in the last year, 2 years.
Yes.
Have they worked for your members, or is the jury still out?
Well, let's be frank about it, and sort of call out to various politicians. When Liz Truss was in charge of this particular area, she roared around the world, sort of making a mark for herself by signing lots of trade agreements. Most of those were in place anyway and were just rubber stamped. I think that the ones you're probably alluding to are sort of the ones of late, actually, the Australian and New Zealand sort of deal, that was struck, and we just sort of felt they were, sort of trade negotiations take often years, and it's to go through the detail and sort it out because they're very complex things, and these were sort of dealt with in a real rush. And we're particularly sort of miffed, with the Australian deal, for instance, that actually in their negotiations with them, they never negotiated any beef going that way or any sort of opening up of their market. It was all about what was going to come here, and to be blunt, it was about a politician wanting to make a bit of a mark for herself and move on to become prime minister, and we all knew what happened there. but actually, so I think they real considered, and they really didn't do their homework. I hope they've learnt their lesson from that. There's been a massive outcry from the NFU and ourselves, and we're still actually sort of flagging up to some of the sort of the failings of these sort of deals. And certainly our concern with the Australian sort of deal was that they didn't think of, and they didn't speak to us in the industry about what the potential challenges there, sort of and what that deal ought to look like. So if you actually look at what they've granted them in terms of the amount of meat that they could send here, if that came as loins, right at the, and why would the Australians send sort of cheap cuts around here? You don't send something around, you target the value market here. They could completely undermine our sort of our value cuts in this country. To the detriment of us. It's those value cuts that certainly our members make any money off, adding value to that. We don't make a lot of money out of selling mince. In fact, actually, it's probably a loss maker. So it's those value sort of cuts that you sort of make a margin with, and that keeps the industry sort of going and means you can pay the farmers more for it, and then that could be completely undermined. And there was no consultation with the industry about what the details of this deal. It was, let's just get this signed so that I can go off and be Prime Minister.
And Nick, what is the one lesson that you think UK government should take into account following the Australian trade deal, and how should they be listening to the British meat processors more?
Yeah, I think they probably have taken enough grief about it now. We're seeing a lot more than talking to us about sort of deals and consulting us more. And Rishi Sunak went to the sort of the food summit last year in June, and he's very clear, sort of that they were going to prioritise, food security, and actually going to put some British sort of farming at the top of these concerns. So I'd like to think they've learnt the lessons, and certainly we're seeing a lot more evidence of them sort of talking to us now about different things. But it's I would still like to see more. Sort of that they need to actually If you watch the Americans and the New Zealanders and sort of even the sort of the Danes, actually the great sort of meat trading nations, their industry is hand in hand with government when they're negotiating sort of deals and working sort of very closely with them. It doesn't, the culture in this country doesn't really lend itself to that. Our civil servants are not very keen on actually getting very close to industry, and you see in other countries of the world that they are right sort of hand in hand and working sort of working together for what's best for the country. So still like to see a lot more sort of liaisons and a bit more openness to sort of talk to us about what these deals ought to look like.
Nick, last question for you. 2024 is probably going to be a year of political change in the UK, in the US. There's elections happening all over the world. You clearly speak for the British Meat Processors Association, but if there were one message you could give to an incoming UK government, an incoming US administration when it comes to the meat industry, what would it be?
I think I wouldn't have too many messages for the US really, other than we have a consumer here that actually has been conditioned over the years not to have hormone beef, so that it's always going to be contentious if they start wanting to send us hormone beef. In terms of the UK government, it's think about food security. Think about it. It's and it goes deeper than just food security. It's actually about what happens in the countryside, and look at the big picture, and sort of take that into consideration, because at the moment it feels to us as though food security is getting worse, not better. Despite all their, sort of their protestations that they're putting it at the top of their sort of priority list. Well, they don't say it's top of the priority list; they just say it's a priority. But they need to take food security seriously, and they need to start measuring it. Sort of by sector and have some real sort of benchmark it and see where we are and make sure that it doesn't get any worse really, because the consumer in this country will lose out. I think that climate change will lose out. Everyone loses if food security drops below where it is now.
Nick, thank you so much for your time today and your honesty. Thanks to wrap up, really. Just a reminder, you can get Food to Go on Spotify, on Google Podcasts, on Amazon Podcasts. If you're not sure where to find it, head to newfoodmagazine.com and you can get our entire back catalogue on the website. Thank you, of course, to Merck Life Science, our sponsor too.